Throughout my life, I would go through phases of different hobbies. I'd pick something that interests me, obsess over it for a year or so, and then find something new to keep myself entertained. During the summer of 2022, I was big into fishing. About an hour's drive away is a shore house my family has owned for decades that's on the water with a lagoon and a small Boston whaler. My friends and I would take frequent trips there to fish and just chill. It was the following October, after summer, when my two friends, Asher and Victor, decided to hit the shore house for a weekend to try to catch some striper, as they're abundant during the fall months. Asher was an avid fisherman, which was a big reason why I got into the whole fishing craze in the first place. Unfortunately, during this time, our boat was out of the water due to maintenance, so we'd have to fish off the beach and piers. This was no problem, though, as Asher had all the necessary rods and gear to do so. We got together on a Friday afternoon and I drove us all down. When we got there, we fished during the day off of different piers along the inlet. Night rolled by, and only one of us had caught a fish, which was Asher, of course. It was just a small bass though, nothing too exciting. Bummed about our luck, we decided to stay up late to fish off the beach during the night. Asher said he knew a good beach spot about 20 minutes away, which took us down a desolate road with woods on both sides. It opened up into a small gravel parking area, or at least what seemed like one. Asher said since we'd have to walk a little ways to the spot, we should take everything we need now so we wouldn't have to go back to the car to get anything. We planned on staying up to catch the sunrise, so we packed accordingly. We walked about 5 minutes down this path, which opened up into a massive beach. We set up camp, which consisted of beach chairs, a speaker, and 2 coolers, one filled with ice for fish and one filled with snacks, water, and beers. Asher brought these massive fishing rods that were ideal for beach fishing and also rod holders that you would hammer into the sand. He also had these little bells that connect to the tip of the rod to notify you of any movement. We all cast our rods, cracked a couple of beers, and played the waiting game. Within 2 hours, each of us had caught decent-sized fish, which definitely lightened our spirits. We were having a great time, music blasting, knowing that no one was around on this deserted beach. Mid-conversation, Victor stopped talking, lowered the music, and jolted his head to the left. He asked if we heard that, to which we replied, "Heard what?" It looked like he was concentrating on something for a second and then said, "I heard someone yell something." We obviously thought he was hearing things or just joking with us, but he insisted he heard someone yell out something that sounded like a "yo" or a "hey." Either way, it seemed unlikely given that we were on some hidden beach at like 1 a.m., so he quickly forgot about it and our conversation resumed. It definitely made us more aware, though. A couple of minutes later, right after I cast in a fresh hook, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was something on the beach in the distance, but I couldn't see what exactly. The others noticed it too. As it got closer, we realized what it was, a person walking towards us. We grew silent and turned off the music. He came up to us. It was a middle-aged white man, maybe 40 or 50. He was wearing a dark blue jacket with a hat and hood up. The way he walked up to us was really sketchy, and he had this intimidating look on his face. We said, "What's up?" kind of awkwardly. He just eyed us down for like 10 seconds and then said in a low voice, "What are you boys up to?" It was pretty apparent what we were up to. Asher said, "We're fishing," and he let out some grunt of acknowledgement and nodded his head. He didn't say a word after that and just stood there, looking at us, then at the rods, and then at the water. We shot each other looks, thinking he was going to try and rob us. There was no way he could have taken on the 3 of us, though. The bell on one of our rods broke the silence, notifying us that we had potentially hooked a fish. I said, "We got one," kind of directed at everyone but mostly at that weird guy in hopes that I would get some response out of him like a normal person. I walked over to the rods and reeled in a small striper. When I went back to unhook the fish, that man had turned around and left. We watched as his dark silhouette faded away into the night. We made sure that we had all of our belongings, then sat and just talked about how odd that encounter was. He left without harming us, though, so we concluded that he was just some weird man who was now, thankfully, out of our business. We kept the music off just to be cautious and cracked a few more beers as our conversation transitioned to different topics. At one point, while staring into the horizon, I thought I heard something in the distance. It took me a second to realize what it was, but when I did, my heart dropped. It was a car alarm. I knew it was mine. It was the only car in that lot, and there were no houses out there for probably miles. We started panicking and decided to run back to the car, leaving all of our stuff behind. It took us a couple of minutes to get there, and when we did, I was completely distraught. My tires had been slashed, and my driver's side window had been shattered. I got on my phone with the police immediately and told them my location and situation. The operator asked if I knew who may have done it, and we said some sketchy guy came up to us as we were fishing. She asked if I knew where he went, and I said no. Just as I said this, we heard rustling in the woods around us. My heart rose into my throat. I felt trapped. We frantically ran like 200 yards down the road and hid in the trees. I told the operator this, and she said to stay hidden and keep quiet. Within 10 minutes, we saw 2 cop cars speed up with their lights on. We ran back to the car and saw 3 officers searching the area. Multiple things had been stolen, including my wallet, some cash that was in the glove box, and the remainder of Asher's fishing gear. They found a large knife lying on the ground nearby, which they took for fingerprints and evidence. I told them the whole story, with my adrenaline still pumping. They said we were smart to run away and hide, as it's very likely this man meant us harm. Those words made me appreciate my life so much more. The officers made us feel safe and were nice enough to help us pack up the equipment and carry it back. They took down our information and gave us a ride back to the house. We stayed up all night reflecting on what had just happened. That morning, Victor got us a ride up north, and I picked up my car from the shop a few days later. To this day, this is by far the most frightening experience I've ever had. What was supposed to be a normal fishing trip became a terrifying ordeal that cost me hundreds of dollars worth of damages. I never got a call back from the police, meaning that guy is probably still out there. Needless to say, I gave up fishing as a hobby and haven't touched it since. Far from civilization, nestled deep within a remote valley, flowed a river teeming with life and death in equal measure. It was said that the spirits of those who had perished in its unforgiving currents still haunted its banks, seeking vengeance on the living who dared to trespass upon their domain. Among the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, was Nadia, a thrill-seeker with a penchant for danger that bordered on obsession. Determined to test her mettle against the river's legendary inhabitants, she embarked on a solo kayaking expedition, heedless of the warnings that echoed in her ears. As she navigated the treacherous rapids, Nadia felt a chill wind sweep down from the mountains, carrying with it whispers of the past and the promise of doom. Ignoring the sense of unease that gnawed at her insides, she pressed on, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. But as she rounded a bend in the river, she was greeted by a sight that froze the blood in her veins. A spectral figure, pale and ethereal, drifted silently upon the water's surface, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, fixated upon Nadia with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. Paralyzed with terror, she watched as the figure drew nearer, its form twisting and contorting with each passing moment. And then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged forward, its icy fingers closing around Nadia's throat with a grip that stole the very breath from her lungs. Gasping for air, she fought against the spectral assailant, her paddle swinging wildly as she struggled to break free. But the spirit's grasp was unyielding, its grip tightening with each passing second until Nadia could feel her consciousness slipping away. Just when all seemed lost, a blinding light pierced the darkness, driving back the specter with a force that sent it shrieking into the night. Blinking away tears of relief, Nadia found herself face to face with a figure bathed in radiant light, a guardian spirit come to her aid in her hour of need. With a gentle touch, the spirit guided Nadia to safety, its presence warding off the malevolent forces that lurked within the river's depths. And as she emerged from the water, shaken but alive, she knew that she would never again tempt fate in the haunted waters that lay beyond. This happened in the early summer of 2020, right when COVID was at its peak. I'm sure most of you can relate to staying at home during quarantine and not being able to go out. With the constant boredom of staying locked away inside of my house, I decided to take a day for a fishing trip. I live in South Florida, a place where it's notorious to go fishing. My state was still on lockdown, but I didn't care. I drove about an hour's drive away to Key West and went under a bridge to where I was sure I would get a decent catch. The waves were a little rough, but it didn't matter. Fast forward to about 30 minutes later, I'm still fishing, waiting for a bite. I look to my left and see what appeared to be a blue tarp setup behind one of the pillars of the bridge. I thought nothing of it, but for whatever reason, I looked back and saw a man standing there looking at me. To be honest, he kind of startled me as I jumped a little bit and nodded my head as a hello. However, he didn't seem to acknowledge my greeting as he kept staring at me with this blank expression I couldn't even describe. By the looks of it, he looked homeless, worn, torn clothes and had a full-on white beard, kind of like what you would picture as your typical old fisherman. What made me unsettled, however, was that his right hand was always behind his back. I pretended to concentrate on fishing, but I could still feel his gaze looking at me. Suddenly, he then jumps into the water and is swimming directly toward me. Even with the rough waves and the current from under the bridge, he was extremely fast. I was out from under that bridge in less than 15 seconds and got in my car with my foot glued to the gas pedal. I also left my stuff behind as, obviously, my life was more worth saving than that. I drove about a few miles where I stopped at a gas station for a snack and then proceeded to go home. What that man was going to do to me or what he wanted, I don't know. I assumed he was probably a dangerous homeless person who didn't like people near where he lived. The next day, I drove back to the bridge and tried to get my stuff, only to find it gone. Not only that, but the blue tarp and the man were also gone. Nothing was left except for an old hunting knife left on one of the platforms where the pillars were held up. After seeing it, I knew that's probably what he was hiding behind his back. This happened in the early summer of 2020, right when COVID was at its peak. I'm sure most of you can relate to staying at home during quarantine and not being able to go out. With the constant boredom of staying locked away inside of my house, I decided to take a day for a fishing trip. My name is Edgar. I'm 17 years old now, but the events that I'm about to tell you happened about 5 years ago. It started with me and my grandfather Richard. We were going fishing just like we had many times before in our little boat in the middle of the lake. I loved those moments with my grandfather. It was relaxing, and he would tell me stories all day long. One day, it all changed, however, a day I wish never happened. Still, after 5 years, I'm not forgetting any details. It still burned deep into my mind. It started out normal enough. We gathered our fishing gear, got it in the back of our truck, and hopped in. We headed out for the lake, and the drive went by smoothly. After we got there, we transferred all our gear from the truck into the boat and got in ourselves, letting the water carry the boat as we made our way a bit deeper. It was beautiful out in the water, surrounded by nature, our boat gently rocking left and right. It was a great lifestyle, and we both loved it. As we were casting our fishing rods, my grandpa telling me one of his stories, I noticed something glinting a bit in front of our boat. I pointed it out to my grandfather, who decided to try and fish it out. Maybe it was a necklace or something, and we thought that it would be cool if we found something like that in the water. As my grandfather cast his line and started to roll it back, I could see he didn't catch the shiny object. He did catch something, though. I could see it even under the water. As he pulled the object out, we could both see that it was a bone. Weird, we thought, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was small enough to be a fish bone or something, so we just cast a line again. This time, however, the line seemed to struggle with the weight, but we could see the shiny object coming up. As he was bringing it out, I could see the object was attached to something bigger, but in the water, I thought it could just be some random trash laying around. As he got it out of the water, however, it all changed. What we saw in front of us was, without a doubt, a human skull, and there was a pendant attached around one of its eye sockets. My grandfather quickly tossed the fishing rod from his hands, and he wanted to go home immediately. We didn't bring cell phones, so we had to get back home to call the police. We made it back, and in a rush, we jumped into the truck as he sped off. It was slowly starting to get dark as we made our way home, the forest surrounding us. I thought I could see a shadowy figure running along our side in the forest on multiple occasions. I didn't bring it up to my grandpa, however, because it looked like it was a humanoid but running on 4 legs, and I was sure humans can't run that fast, so I just thought it was my imagination because I was scared. When we got home, my grandpa called the police and told them where the lake was and that there was a fishing pole there too. Some officers came to our house to get a report, and we explained how we came across it. They thanked us for our time and were on their way as me and my grandfather watched behind. That night, I had trouble sleeping, waking up multiple times to see a shadowy figure in the corner of my room, just for it to be gone after I blinked again. I woke up the next morning feeling tired, like I had just run a marathon instead of sleeping. I went downstairs, and my mom had already cooked me some waffles for breakfast, which made the morning a bit more bearable. I loved waffles. I finished up eating and headed outside to play with my friends, but I could never shake the feeling of being watched. When I brought it up to my friends, they would say that they felt normal and that I'm just paranoid. I believed them. I hadn't seen anything, after all, and I was ruining fun for myself and them because of my paranoia. It still didn't help. In fact, every day that went by, the feeling became stronger and more frequent. It had gotten to the point where I didn't want to leave the house at all, because I was feeling unsafe. When my grandfather saw me acting strange, he asked me what was wrong. I don't know, Grandpa. I saw something moving parallel to our car when we were coming back from that lake, I said, expecting him to comfort me and say how everything is going to be fine. What I saw instead was a pure look of terror and panic on my grandfather's face as he got up and frantically paced around the room. They followed us. I should have known they'd follow us. They never found that damned skull. It was a trap all along, he said as I saw a couple of tears forming in his eyes. Why the hell did you tell me this now, huh? Why didn't you tell me earlier? He yelled as I started to cry, thinking I had done something terrible. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me because I was scared. I couldn't. I trailed off as tears coated my cheeks and dripped from my face. My grandpa didn't even look at me as he headed for the stairs. We're doomed, I could hear him mumble as he made his way up. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I felt guilty. I didn't know why my grandfather was so upset. Sure, I could sometimes see a figure in the shadows or feel something watching me, but it never affected me otherwise. When it was about 4 a.m. and I could finally feel my eyes getting heavy, I could hear some sort of chanting sound mixed with buzzing. Right after that, I heard a loud crash in the hallway. I didn't know what it was, but I was too scared to look. I stayed in my bed until I heard my mom scream loudly. I jumped out of bed, not caring about the fear anymore, thinking something bad had happened to my mother. As I rushed out to the hallway, I saw my mother crying over my grandpa, who was lying on the floor. When I got closer, I saw the reason she was crying. My grandpa looked like he had drowned, blue color enveloping his skin, his clothes wet. I couldn't hold my vomit in any longer. I puked all over the floor, feeling nauseous and lightheaded as I passed out. I woke up in my room, my mother sitting next to me on a chair. She hugged me after I woke up and cried on my shoulder. I asked her if Grandpa was dead, and she just nodded her head. His lungs were full of water. No one knows how it happened or how he got to the hallway in that condition. It was all a mystery. My mother did, however, report that she heard whispered chants along with buzzing. After I told her I heard the same thing, she was shocked, thinking it was all in her head from the lack of sleep she'd been getting recently. We both went to bed that night, my eyes growing heavy as soon as I lay down on the bed. I dozed off almost immediately from exhaustion, but I was awoken by the sound of whispered chanting and buzzing coming from the hallway. Thinking it was whatever had killed my grandfather, I stayed in my room, silent as the night outside my house. That was until about 20 minutes later, I once again heard my mother scream and then gurgle like she was drowning. I jumped out of bed again, but as soon as I reached for the door, the sound stopped. As I opened it, I could see my mother in the same state my grandfather was the night before, blue skin, wet clothes. I started crying uncontrollably for hours until I finally found myself going to the phone and dialing 911. An ambulance and police officers came. I don't remember any of it. The funeral, those couple of days went by in a blur. I found myself in a foster home right up until last month. They let me come back to my property because I was turning 18 soon. As I'm recording this, there is a sound in front of my door. It sounds like whisper chanting and buzzing. I think they are waiting until 12 a.m. when I turn 18. This is probably my last day here, and I wanted to post this as a warning to everyone. If there is a shiny object in the water while you're fishing, turn around and go home. It's not worth it. I live in South Florida, a place where it's notorious to go fishing. My state was still on lockdown, but I didn't care. I drove about an hour's drive away to Key West and went under a bridge to where I was sure I would get a decent catch. The waves were a little rough, but it didn't matter. Fast forward to about 30 minutes later, I'm still fishing, waiting for a bite. I look to my left and see what appeared to be a blue tarp setup behind one of the pillars of the bridge. I thought nothing of it, but for whatever reason, I looked back and saw a man standing there looking at me. To be honest, he kind of startled me as I jumped a little bit and nodded my head as a hello. However, he didn't seem to acknowledge my greeting as he kept staring at me with this blank expression I couldn't even describe. By the looks of it, he looked homeless, worn, torn clothes and had a full-on white beard, kind of like what you would picture as your typical old fisherman. What made me unsettled, however, was that his right hand was always behind his back. I pretended to concentrate on fishing, but I could still feel his gaze looking at me. Suddenly, he then jumps into the water and is swimming directly toward me. Even with the rough waves and the current from under the bridge, he was extremely fast. I was out from under that bridge in less than 15 seconds and got in my car with my foot glued to the gas pedal. I also left my stuff behind as, obviously, my life was more worth saving than that. I drove about a few miles where I stopped at a gas station for a snack and then proceeded to go home. What that man was going to do to me or what he wanted, I don't know. I assumed he was probably a dangerous homeless person who didn't like people near where he lived. The next day, I drove back to the bridge and tried to get my stuff, only to find it gone. Not only that, but the blue tarp and the man were also gone. Nothing was left except for an old hunting knife left on one of the platforms where the pillars were held up. After seeing it, I knew that's probably what he was hiding behind his back.